All right. Hello, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Umair, and I'm part of FAANA Executive Board. And thank you for joining us on today's 17th webinar session, which we're going to talk about business sustainability and the role of tech entrepreneurs and business decision makers. Our speaker today is Dr. Umair Shah, and he has a comprehensive background in management principles. And we will be talking about the entrepreneurial decision making in today's complex world. As you know, this webinar series is part of FAANA, which is FAST Alumni Association in North America, and we have been doing various initiatives over the past few years involving fundraising, tech incubation, R&D projects and ideas. And webinar is one such initiative that we launched a few years ago. Currently, today's session will be 17th session of that series. So thank you for joining us. Without any further ado, I will move the ball to our speaker, Dr. Umair Shah.
Thank you very much, Uzair. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. For those who don't know me, my name is Umair and I live in Waterloo, Canada, and I'm a graduate of FAST. So I did my undergrad from Lahore campus, and I did that in business administration. So I would say that I'm not from the traditional technology background, somebody who has a degree in telecom engineering or maybe computer science. But later on in my career, I switched towards this technical side. So I'll talk a little bit about my research and what excites me as a researcher in a bit. I hope that you can see the slides here. Can you just maybe, it's not showing well here. Okay, this is, yeah, this is fine. This is good. I think there was a problem at my end. I work at the University of Waterloo. I'm in the Faculty of Engineering, and my expertise or my research interest have been about how can we bring sustainability, or how can we ensure that organizations that are propping up these days, especially tech organizations, how can they create value for multiple stakeholders? And this has been a challenge, and there's a whole lot of literature behind this and a lot of practice behind this, which I'm going to talk about in today's talk, which can help us move forward by bringing more conscious capitalism in and also moving capitalism to 2.0 stage. So that's why I thought it would be very appropriate if I can speak with some tech entrepreneurs or people who are going to be thinking about starting their businesses. They can really learn these principles, or even these principles can be applied to intrapreneurs, not just entrepreneurs. So intrapreneurs are people who are working in big organizations who want to bring some change in their existing organizations through entrepreneurial principles. So it's equally applicable, it's equally useful for any management style, any organization. All right, so can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the layout is going to be pretty simple. I want to keep it a more interactive session. So rather me just professing about things, I would rather ask you to ask me questions so that we can have a conversation and then we can get further clarity on these concepts. And we can switch to Urdu or even Punjabi if you like, and we can really learn about these concepts. So my focus would be to briefly introduce about myself in the next few slides and also the place where I work. So Waterloo, it's considered as the Silicon Valley of the North. There's a lot of tech organizations around, and there's this culture of entrepreneurship here. So I want to really talk about the overall ecosystem here. Then I would talk about the stakeholder theory. That's a theory that I really want to work in this area, and I do work in this area, and how much this is relevant to our organizations these days. Then the discussion would be about business ethical concepts and how tech organizations, they're making world a better place. And there's still a lot of room to make it even better. I wish that we had more participants from Pakistan so that we could have some discussion about what's happening in Pakistan. I do stay in touch with some other university in Pakistan, and we have these kind of sessions. So those discussions are very stimulating. For example, when we talk about these ethical business concepts, it's very useful that we bring in some examples from how these are applicable or not applicable to Pakistan. Then what's happening in North America and Europe. So I will really talk about that. And lastly, I mean, so what? Why are we even having this talk? So that would be my closing remarks. And then at any point, I don't want to open the questions just toward the end. Please feel free to interject at any time. Uzair, you're the moderator, so you can please make sure if there's a question, stop me and maybe give the mic or video to that person so that we can have more conversations about it. So next slide, please.
Can you see the next slide?
No, I just see the presentation outline slide.
Okay, can you see it now?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay, what about now?
Yes, I can now. Yes. All right. So as I mentioned that Waterloo, if you're not familiar with this area, I just want to tell you a little bit about this region. So this overall region of Toronto, Waterloo, it's considered to be the corridor and the Silicon Valley of the North. A lot of tech organizations are around. Companies like Google, they have their office in Waterloo. We have many tech organizations like RIM, which is now BlackBerry, and also OpenText, D2L. These have been started and also expanded in this region by our own alumni from the University of Waterloo. So Waterloo has this push about engaging with the communities, solving real problems, and they encourage their students when they just graduate to start their own business in one form or the other. I do mentor a lot of final year design project teams at Waterloo Engineering, and every year there are a lot of things that we talk about, we discuss about, and we learn from them. Sorry, I just lost the slides. Now they're back. So, and there are quite a few organizations that really help us engage with the community. For example, Accelerator Center. I know that in Pakistan and even in North America, there's this push about having some sort of commercialization centers. So we have this center which is external to the university. However, even if it's external, it still works as one of the important organizations in the ecosystem to ramp up the commercialization phase of any tech organization. So when we are graduating or when students are graduating in the last year, they want to build some technology. They want to look out for some other technology companies to partner with them and how to commercialize it, how to file for patent, how to take it to the next stage. So Communitech Hub, for example, it's a government-based initiative in which they provide a place to these startups. They give them the infrastructure. They give them some mentors who really work with them in their particular industry and enable them to do all of this by filing patents, by starting a company, by finding better clients and things like that. So we do train our students heavily on how to commercialize things. Then we have initiatives like Problem Lab. So there's a guy called Larry Smith. He's a professor at the University of Waterloo, one of the best professors I've seen, best speaker, in my opinion. He has some TED Talks as well. So he really initiated this Problem Lab. And by the way, he's also from humanities background, but he's working with tech organizations a lot because he believes that they could really get some guidance from the humanities background and really commercialize their initiatives. So the Problem Lab is a little different from many other initiatives that are there. Their main mandate is that not every problem is good enough to be explored or has enough potential to become big. So they really focus on 4 or 5 problems. They do a lot of research. They publish like 4 or 5 pager, and they share it with all the entrepreneurs and all the ecosystem in the university to tell them that these are the 5 top industries in which our students should really go and venture. For example, before this COVID thing, when things were open, I was invited to one of the talks, and there a couple of ideas just stuck to my head. So they were giving up some seed money from the university and some private investors to students in the final year to work on entertainment industry. And they believe that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry which hasn't been explored too much. And I would say, I mean, this is the same case with Pakistan. I mean, you see a lot of people coming on YouTube these days. A lot of people want to start their business. They want to have some social media presence and all that. But a lot of that market is still untapped. There's still a lot of room there. So this entertainment industry is kind of an open field. Then another idea that stuck to my mind was about fake news. So they really wanted to build some algorithm, some solution to this fake news problem, and they were willing to give $25,000 as seed money for that. So it's quite interesting. They have a really nice way to go about mentor students and ask them to commercialize it. Then we have Velocity. So Velocity is kind of a center where our final year students from all over the campus, from humanities, from social sciences, from any background, from technology, engineering, whatever. They actually, they get a place in this center and they live there. So for a few months, they're living with a real mentor who's accomplished entrepreneur and has probably sold a company to big tech like Google or something like that, and has all the ingredients of publishing this. Then we also train our students in technology, and I see a few familiar names in the call today, who are all graduates from Conrad. So they really help, or the younger folks or anybody who wants to really start a business in the technology space by providing them this education. We don't have a business school though at Waterloo, but the closest to the business school is this Conrad School. Now I think recently changed the name of it. They didn't call it Conrad Business Entrepreneurship and Technology Center. They now call it a school. So it's a business entrepreneurship school. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so primarily I just want to talk about the stakeholder theory in my talk and what it entails for everyone and what kind of messages we can extract from it. Maybe you can click one more time there, or maybe 4 more times so that all the points are here. Perfect. So the real premises from the management standpoint and what we are facing because of this COVID thing, a lot of times organizations and people in academia, they do consider this fact that there are unequal opportunities of wealth creation in the world. Now, it is improving with the help of technology and with the role of these tech organizations. There's a role, obviously, of academic researchers. So back in, even in 1800s, Adam Smith, they all started writing about this philanthropy concept, this invisible hand, and all of what capitalism should entail and what it is. Then there were some problems after the Second World War. During 1950s, they started thinking about that a lot of our people are becoming sick because of this industrialization. They've been treated as robots, really, not as humans. So the concepts of management by objectives and these kind of things started propping up. And also scientific management and these concepts became very popular in early 1900s because of industrialization. The volumes were increasing. So people realized that it's not very helpful for human beings. We need to have better working conditions for our people. So they started coming up with things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and humanistic side of things. So in 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, things started to move in the right direction. We did not conquer everything, obviously. There were still some problems with capitalism, and there were still some problems with greed and all that, which we hear about almost every day. So there has been an active role of academic researchers in this area, and they've been looking at what kind of industries have shifted from, let's say, core production industry to now service industry. So you can see that in Canada and North America, and even in Pakistan, the service industry has grown exponentially. And academic researchers have really talked about this in their research. They try to, speak about this through collecting evidence that what's coming next. So this is a knowledge economy. A lot of the times so when you talk to any startup now, they don't really talk about the revenues they're generating. They're actually talking about how many user base they have. Like the metrics have changed over time, and they will keep on changing in future. So the role of business innovation has always been there. That's the best part of, I would still call it capitalism. That's the best part of it because it enables you to innovate. It gives you motivation to do better and compete. Now, I'm not just saying that everything about capitalism has went right or did go right. Obviously, we had our own issues, and in different parts of the world, there are some issues. But let's have a conversation about how we can resolve these issues and what is happening right now in the world. So really, I mean, there's this thing about stakeholder engagement and this model of business stakeholder engagement that I really researched on, and this is my core area. So during my master's, and then I pursued PhD at the University of Waterloo in the area of management of technology, I figured that there are all these different business stakeholder engagement models. Really, I mean, there's so many derivatives of doing good for the society, for example, like corporate social responsibility. There's social responsibility. There's integrated view of corporate social responsibility. There's residual view of corporate social responsibility. There's social entrepreneurship, and all these derivatives, which are pretty much saying the same thing, that there's something wrong with capitalism and there's something wrong with our startups. There's something wrong with our companies. So I became extremely interested in this question. And I really want to say that, like, what is differentiating? Where is the difference in all of these derivatives that we've talked about? And how can companies really go forward? And what is stopping tech organizations, startup organizations, to embracing all the stakeholders? So I went out and I started doing interviews with a lot of startups in the region, in Waterloo region. I started with that. And I felt that a lot of the times the responses I was getting, a lot of the time these startups were saying, we don't care about trade associations. We don't care about the government. We don't care about non-governmental organizations. We don't even care about our suppliers at this point. We just care about our customers. Fair enough. I mean, they're at a stage when resources are scarce and they really don't have too much to go and align their interest with it. But on the other hand, best management practices would suggest, or at least point you towards the direction that in order to succeed, you have to align your interest with various different stakeholders. And these stakeholders, your suppliers, your employees, your customers, your trade association, or whatever, whoever you can create a difference for, or can create a difference for you, is a stakeholder. So essentially my question then became, so how would startup firms respond to various different stakeholder models? Or how do mature stage firms, which are on the other side of the continent, would, in the tech industry, would respond to all these different business stakeholder engagement? And how do growth stage organizations, which are somewhere in the middle, which are enjoying exponential growth, they're at a stage when they have acquired a lot of funding or resources, revenues, how would they go about that? So that's where the whole journey started. Can you just go to the next slide? And then I figured, and just maybe click one more time. And then I figured that the stakeholder theory kind of helps us, especially in the tech industry, to have a better understanding about how to go about our alignment with what opportunities are out there. So according to Ed Freeman is the guy who's a professor at Darden Business School and top-notch scholar. I would even say he has enabled many practitioners in the field to actually create a lot of value for different stakeholders. So he kind of had really professed about changing the story of business. He started that in 1984. Maybe I can just show you his seminal work. So this was the book that he wrote in 1984, and Strategic Management it's called. So he has a story to tell. He says that when I wrote this book, it was against shareholder value or shareholder theory. So shareholder theory would say that in order to create value for your organization, you have to just create value for your shareholders, just one stakeholder, which is your shareholder. And what would happen eventually is that you would start creating value for others as well. But it did not happen. So this guy came in 1984 and said, well, there's something wrong with this theory. We have already suffered from so many dips in stock markets, and people have lost a lot of money, and capitalism is being viewed as evil now. So what's wrong? And he figured that this is a problem. This is an inherent problem in our schools, perhaps, in our business schools, perhaps. We teach our students, we teach our people to just take care of the shareholders at the expense of others. So they don't care about environment that much. They don't care about their communities that much. They don't care about their employees that much. Or sometimes they care about customers, but yeah, they just really focus on their core stakeholder, which is their shareholder. And I will give you many examples around that in a minute. So he went on and he said that, no, there's something wrong there. We have to create value for all stakeholders. And what that means is that any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of an organization is a stakeholder. So if you're a law enforcement agency, terrorists are your stakeholder. Now, there's a paper on that. And what that means is that you, as a policing agency or as a law enforcement agency, you have to stay ahead of them, right? So they can affect you and you can affect them. So you have to really think about aligning your interests with other stakeholders like communities, environment, and all of that. But in the business sphere, if I'm a startup, maybe I have lesser amount of stakeholders to begin with. I'm just focused on customers. Then I have to increase my focus to employees. Then I have to increase my, expand my exposure to other stakeholders. That's how it starts. But one thing that I found was really off with our tech startup culture, and it is still off in North America very much. There are younger lot or these tech startups, they really don't understand how to align their interest with various different stakeholders. They maybe are good with just one or two, but as they're novice, it's very difficult for them to align their interest with just beyond their primary stakeholders, for example. Now, to some extent, that is all right. But later on, they actually have to pay a much heavy price to align the interest with other stakeholders then. For example, you've probably heard about Keurig cups, K-cups. If you can just Google this up, you find Kill the K-cups. It was a movement that started back in early 2010s, or I think it was 2012 or 2013 when this whole thing started. And the co-founder of that company came on media and he actually apologized to the world that I'm sorry that I even came up with this K-pod. How many of us use it all the time? We all use it all the time. It's just very easily accessible in North America or in Europe. I don't know about Pakistan, but here there's a culture of coffee, and you just find that in almost every home or every office. So the basic premise, or when they were starting their company, the idea was to actually serve the environment. But what happened? They actually became the biggest contributor of environmental, issues later on. They said that we came up with this idea so that people don't have to drive out of their office, go to some place, Starbucks, Tim Hortons, or other places to find good quality or decent coffee. Rather, they would stay in their office and get some fresh coffee, and they percolated very quickly, and that was the whole idea. Well, they wanted to reduce carbon footprint, but what they did not think through very well was that the pod they were producing was not biodegradable. So that created issues otherwise. People started saying that this is filling our lands. So eventually they had to hire a chief sustainability officer to actually offset this, and had to spend millions of dollars to offset this mistake. So the idea of stakeholder theory is, or stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management, whatever you want to call it, or a framework, is that you create value for multiple stakeholders without trade-offs. So the moment you have trade-offs, so for example, if you have to really choose between, okay, I'm going to focus on my customer, but at the expense of my employees, that's a trade-off. Now, this is not a very simple solution. It's easier said than done. Think about so many issues that people are facing due to COVID right now. A lot of businesses, they're really in a trade-off situation. They have to think about whether to go and help their employees, retain them, or to even survive in the long run. It is a difficult thing. But as a tech startup, I believe that we need to really educate our younger lot more, or people who are starting at any stage in their life, this tech organizations, because there's a lot of potential of enabling multiple communities. So I just want to briefly talk about some of the tenets of the stakeholder theory, that it's antithetical to the shareholder theory. As I said, shareholder theory is just shareholder focused. And this was saying, no, that's wrong. That's bad capitalism. We really can't survive if we were to go forward with this, this idea anymore. Then it creates VAS, which is an acronym that I've used in my thesis, which is creating value for all stakeholders. Now, it rejects the separation fallacy. What that means, that's a very interesting point. So separation fallacy, according to Freeman, is that sometimes we get into this debate, philosophical debate about, all right, so I'm creating a lot of economic value. And some would say, no, well, you're creating a lot of economic value, then you should definitely also venture into creating social value. So there's the social value. So economic, social, and you just create this fallacy. And Freeman would go and say, well, look at these pods, or look at this mouse, or look at this computer that I'm using right now. Am I creating economic value? Yes, I use this for earning my livelihood. I teach, I use this to write papers, I use this to do research, and I get paid. So yes, it is creating a lot of economic value. Is it also creating social value? Of course it is creating social value. I'm talking to the next generation, I'm teaching them something. They are getting some skill out of it. So yes, I'm creating a social value. So he says that you shouldn't really think about that this is social, this is economic, and then really have to, according to him, business is all about creating value for multiple stakeholders. It has social aspect already ingrained. And I kid you not, when I was writing my thesis, I was actually stunned by this, that over the years, with all these derivatives and all these fancy definitions of how people are creating value for societies, I figured that when capitalism was being written earlier, or some rules were being, were kind of listed earlier, they were all about creating value for the society. And there was nobody who said that we just have to keep on accumulating wealth. Later on, somehow this whole idea became really convoluted, and a lot of other things started to, get into this idea, and somehow it got really messy. So essentially, this idea of creating value is not a new idea. It's a very old idea. And Freeman, I think he said that I get a lot of credit for writing this or saying all these things in 80s, but really it wasn't my idea. This idea was already in practice in Europe. There was a guy who came from Sweden, I think, to SRI, which is Stanford Research Institute, in 1960s. And he had in his own language all these vocabularies for creating value for different stakeholders. And his style of doing business was very different from North American style of doing business. So anyway, so essentially what that means is that separation fallacy has to be rejected. You shouldn't really go for that. And you should really think about it as a tech entrepreneur, as a decision maker of any business, to really create value for your customers, your employees, your suppliers, your financiers, your consumers, or communities, even government, or anybody who you think can create or can affect you or be affected by you. Later on, you're going to do much better then. Yes, please, next slide. All right, so before I go in the debate of this business ethics part, I really want to share some examples, and then you can also ask me any questions if you have. Let's look at a much recent example of COVID-19. So when COVID happened, how would stakeholder capitalism differentiate itself with non-stakeholder capitalism or shareholder capitalism? You know about all the airline industry, like throughout the world, it's in trouble right now. But in North America specifically, there were companies that just accumulated a lot of wealth in last 10 years, a decade or so. They were doing very well. They earned a lot of money. But later on, they decided that in order to create more wealth or to get more money as executives, they should really buy or reinvest or buy back their own stocks. So what happened? When they were buying back their own stocks, the prices were going up. And what that resulted in, their executives ended up with a lot of money in their pockets. They got hefty paybacks, or they got really good salaries and bonuses and all that. Then came COVID-19. The industry was badly hit, so they couldn't even survive for a few months. They really had to go and look out to the government and really lobby to the government to give them a bailout package. I mean, this is an essential service. Obviously, governments, they get really blackmailed sometimes by these big banks and these big corporations because they have a really vested interest in the communities. And that's nothing new. I mean, they've been doing this for a very long time. So if you're just shareholder centric, or you're just focused on the shareholder, this strategy worked for you. Like, you got the best shareholder value you could ever get. But what happened then? after a year, your stock prices plummeted like anything. So if you were at $100, you were probably at $20 when last year in March or April. And now it's regaining again. But I mean, there was a lot of value that was lost. So this is a very short-term view of organizations, the shareholder view. Another example that I could think of is Volkswagen. So I don't know how many of you are aware about what happened back in 2015 when they misreported their EPA, Environmental Protection Agency readings to the government, and they had a software which malfunctioned, or maybe they deliberately did that, which had an effect on their stock price to like 23%. And a lot of this was really propped up again, that this is an issue of business ethics. Now, there are many examples. You can just go on, and you can find almost an article every day in all these different journals or these different news sites, which talk about how businesses are destroying value at times for the communities or for the societies. There's another very famous case, again, around 2015, Martin Shkreli, who was known as the most hated guy on Twitter at one point in time. So he's also known as a pharma guy who actually increased the price of this life-saving drug overnight by 5,000%. So what that resulted in, people just started questioning that there has to be something done about this kind of price hike, and it should be regulated by the governments. Now, there's this thing about the government's actually intervening in a capitalistic structure. It's not considered good. So it has to be laissez-faire, it has to be a free market. But here people were demanding, no, governments, you should have some policies. You should really not allow this to happen, especially when somebody's life is at stake. So this became an ethical issue. This was a business ethics issue. So Martin Shkreli, I think he got convicted, but not because of this, because of something else. And I don't know, I think I've heard or read somewhere that he got out recently. So there are many examples like this, which really bring really bad name to capitalism. And back in 2008, just to last example before I move forward, in 2008, when the economic meltdown happened in North America, I think it was Merrill Lynch Bank. So they actually started all of this. Like there was a domino effect afterwards. They had the state-of-the-art ISO certified corporate social responsibility certification. And what that means is that they were creating the most value for the communities. So the question then became, really? I mean, really, you were the first or the foundation for all this mess that we actually had to endure for a couple of years. So I graduated from FAST in 2009 from Lahore campus, and I still remember that was the worst time to graduate because of this 2008, and I cannot forget that part because before that things were looking very good in the banking industry, and especially in Pakistan, but afterwards it was a mess. So, and really some scholars believe that we haven't really recovered from that recession. So, I mean, this becomes an issue of business ethics then. So there's this philosophical view that some things are deontological, some things are virtue ethics, and I don't want to go into the specifics of it. That would become very technical, but I really want to stay with this thought that business ethics, how does this sound to you? Business ethics. So according to Freeman, again, he believes that this is an oxymoron. He says that we got this idea also wrong, that when we are running a business, we also have to think about ethics. According to him, ethics are an essential part of any business. They shouldn't be taught as a separate course. Now, this is something that is becoming more and more prevalent now. There are new ways of doing business being introduced in North America, for example, and they're happening at a much rapid pace. So there are organizations like Humanistic Management. There are organizations like Conscious Capitalism. There are organizations like Capitalism 2.0. There are organizations like Stakeholder Capitalism. So, and these are all run by or initiated by people from business schools in North America, scholars, and a lot of companies who are getting onto this kind of idea of creating value for multiple stakeholders. And one thing that really happened recently in 2019, October, there was this joint statement made by about 181 companies at the, I think, Business Roundtable in Geneva. And companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, and all these big names, Unilever, their CEOs were there. And they actually wrote a statement together. And the underlying thing was that for us to sustain and to create value, we have to think about multiple stakeholders now. Shareholder capitalism is a thing of the past. We cannot sustain with that. So that was a good, hopeful thing for scholars like myself or people who work in this area to think that now companies are actually getting this idea. And I would share one personal example here. So when I was doing my master's or defending my master's thesis, there was a reader and he questioned me in my thesis. So I talked about these concepts and he said, "Are you professing about communism here?" I'm like, no, this is nowhere near communism. It has nothing to do with communism. This is capitalism, which is actually how it's supposed to be. So this is like more conscious capitalism, and that's how companies and organizations really go about it. And being a student of Islam as well, I also think that this is something very close to what Islam is all about. Taking care of your suppliers, taking care of your customers, taking care of your employees, taking care of your environment, taking care of your communities. So always keep a larger view. And that was very close to my heart as well. I thought that in 1984, Ed Freeman or people likes of Ed Freeman, they actually did that or found this answer through research. And we had this principle 1400 years ago. So this was something really, I would say it's common sense. It's not even funny. So it's just common sense. All right, so any questions so far?
So I think we do have a couple of questions, but I think they will like to ask it towards the end. So
okay, that's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. I think we'll finish it up first, and then we'll open the floor for questions.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So let's move forward to the next slide, please. Okay, so these questions are not my questions. So I found these questions from a few resources or a few sources, and I think these questions can really enable us as business decision makers to think about ethics or how we can address some wicked problems of today. For example, is prioritizing the short-term needs of stockholder consistent with the virtues of the organization? So if you're using some medium, or if you're thinking about answering a bigger problem in your organization, and this is one of the questions, do ask yourself this question. Is it consistent with the purpose of your organization? And that plays a real important role, especially for tech entrepreneurs. People who start tech organizations, and this is again something that I have experienced a lot and have written about it. And there are other people who have also written about this, that tech organizations, they don't start just by this one purpose of that, I want to become extremely rich. No. So essentially the purpose, or in majority cases, the purpose is that I want to solve this problem. There's a problem in the world. For example, there's less education right now. How can I create a company that can enable everybody to get educated, for example? So there's a bigger purpose behind that. Or if I'm a company that wants to bring nutrition to certain communities, okay, I'm going to start an organic food company, which is going to serve people in underserved or underdeveloped economies and at a much reduced price so that they can also get better life. And at the same time, I'll be now dealing with volumes and it's going to help me sustain as well. So that's how you think about the purpose and you think about this kind of question. Another question that really sometimes helps me and others, will I make a precedent out of my decision? Am I willing to treat similar situations the same? Is this a short-term solution to a long-term problem? So this is a good question to ask. If you're a decision maker or somebody who manages others or has this responsibility in an organization, do think about this. Whether what I'm doing, is it going to make a precedent or not? What decision is in the long-term interest of the organization? So really, I've given you a few examples about short-term versus long-term decision-making. And it's very tempting to go with shorter-term decision-making, but it's sometimes more fruitful to go for long-term decision-making. Are the values of my industry in line with those of a larger community? If not, should I stay in the industry? Now, this is a question when I deliver talks in another university and I interact with a lot of final year students in Pakistan. I get this question a lot. So I don't understand how this concept could be applicable to countries like Pakistan, where you have to do many things to operate. Otherwise, you won't be able to operate. So not everything can be ethical. So if that is a question, I mean, I do get it. I understand that that is how it is. For example, I know that in Pakistan, most companies do not pay their suppliers on time. Like the biggest loser is the supplier in this whole equation. So my answer to this kind of predicament or question is that, yes, it is difficult, obviously, but why can't you become the first one who actually go and help the supplier? And when the word goes out, all the suppliers will want to work with you and they would give you the best value. They would give you the best ideas and the whole ripple effect would start. So start aligning yourself with all these different stakeholders. It may not be very easy. And the other thing about stakeholder theory is that it's a pragmatic theory. So we do exercise pragmatism here. Pragmatism means that we are not saying that financiers are bad or anything. No, you need financiers. If you are not creating wealth, you have got this idea wrong. You have to create wealth to sustain. So we're not saying that wealth creation is bad. All we're saying is that not at the expense of any other stakeholder. So really, I mean, this question is very integral if you are working in the industry. And if you find that this is like too much, this is too much against my belief system, then might as well just change, go to some other industry, or maybe rethink that business, help rethink that business in that community. Next slide, please. So is there any stakeholder harmed by this decision? So again, going back to the example of Keurig cups, so they did not think through too much about their biodegradability. And now we do hear from Europe and their initiative that started in 2015, 16 about circular economy. And circular economy means that you have to recycle your items, whatever you're developing as engineers, you have to think about re-engineering that. So you have to have some mechanism there. Again, this is something that is more prevalent in European markets than others in the world. I'm still finding some evidence from North America. I'm writing a chapter on that, and it's been a struggle so far. There are certain concepts which I believe are much well articulated in European markets than others, and many others, and especially in North America, we are far behind. So if you're starting a tech company in this area and you believe that you want to operate in North America and that's your primary market, do think about all these things, and that's going to give you this edge, give you this X factor, which is going to help you in the long run. Are the actions of the firm violating any regulations or laws? Are the financial statement abiding by the letter and spirit of the rules and regulations? So, I mean, we do know about Enron example, again, something that happened in 2001, that they were just cooking books. And this happens a lot in some parts of the world, we get it. But when it happens and when you get caught, well, you know what happens to these organizations, these empires. Enron is no more anywhere. So these things do have an effect. Are the actions of the firm likely to jeopardize the reputation of the firm on its key personnel? Are the financial statements hiding any such actions of the firm? Or could I defend my decision if all the information became public? So these are some of the questions that really enable me and help me decide about my decision making about different stakeholders. I also want to give you another example of BlackBerry. So BlackBerry, when I came to Waterloo, I mean, they had the biggest campus of any organization around. They had, I don't know, 60 or 70 buildings filled with employees. They were doing manufacturing, they were doing testing. And their stock price, I think during 2012, I think, or 2013, I can be wrong here, but around that time was about $150. And look at their price right now. Just before this whole GameStop thing happened, I mean, their real price was about $6 or $7. And who's using BlackBerry anymore? Nobody. They actually are not even operating in North America and not competing in the mobile space. And when I came here, they were the biggest competitor of iPhone. So in just a few years, what happened? Their CEO, they stopped listening. So my research was funded from BlackBerry in master's and my PhD as well. So we were going back with all these different ideas and asking them to change some of the things. And the answers that we were getting, um, who's our QWERTY keypad is just perfect. Nobody's going to get over it. So iPhone is not a threat. These touch phones are not a threat. And there were things like, so there was this arrogance and there was this not listening to customers, not aligning their interests with the customers, and start another S curve. They stopped doing that. And I think they were heavily sued by another company. They lost billions of dollars. So in order to pitch any idea to them, you really had to sign a very thick NDA just to give them some idea. And they were really scared and they were in a bad shape. And I actually saw that happen in Waterloo. It had a huge effect on the community here in a negative way for a few years. So the housing prices plummeted. A lot of people lost their jobs, thousands of people. They sold their houses, they moved to other places. So overall, we as community experienced that jolt. But there were some good things also came out of it. Since they were employing highly skilled people. So a lot of people started their own ventures and they started their own companies with all that knowledge. And that actually helped the community rebuild in a few more years. But it took us to a few years to come out of it. And now I think BlackBerry, they're still operating. They were in good shape in terms of cash performance. So they had a lot of cash. And that's the point that I was making with all these airline industries, that they were just they didn't have cash to operate too much. They already invested all the extra cash they had in buying back their own stock so that the prices can go up. So they were manipulating the system. So that's, I guess, you could go to the next slide where I think I have the references. These are the books that I would recommend you all to read if you're interested in the subject of ethics and business. Although one of the books, in fact, both of them can be taught in schools. But another good book is the Stakeholder Theory, which is a much recent book. And I think I have a couple of other books around stakeholder theory, which talks about all these different examples and what's going on with the world. I guess we are on time. I still have like 10 minutes and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your, very thought-provoking session. So really appreciate you taking out time. I think there was one question from Rafael Bhai. So I'll ask him to unmute so that he can ask the question. And then meanwhile, if somebody else has a question, please feel free to drop me a message in the chat box and then I will unmute you.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Dr. Umair, thank you, first of all, on the behalf of the organization to join and taking out your Sunday afternoon, also on this Valentine's Day. So my question is basically, as you said, right, it's like there are two different views of stakeholder theory versus shareholder theory, right? And while we were growing up in we saw that most of the organizations would be focused towards corporate social responsibility and not necessarily shareholder theory sorry, yes, I would say stakeholder theory. And even if you go like looking for a scholarship, like a sponsorship for something or an event, they would say, oh, we don't care about you, but we have a corporate social responsibility head and we can give you some money out of it, but we don't share the same values as you, right? And then this whole thing of Edward Freeman starts coming in like 90s, early 2000s, and now, in fact, last month I was actually seeing one of the interviews of Simon Sinek as well, where he was talking about Tesla and saying that this is how Tesla's job is not to just make cars. The purpose is actually bigger than that, right? So, but the question that I have, or like I feel as an industry, would be more about like comparing the same Friedman logic versus Freeman logic. Is so like if I'm working in an organization, as you said, entrepreneurs, right? So when we see that every VP is concerned with their own department, position, and performance. So for example, let's see if there's a technology VP, all he cares about is the technology or the project delivered in time. I don't care about procurement. I don't care about customer service. As long as my work is done, I'm getting performance increments. I'm good. Similarly, when you see cities and cities don't care about their residents, to be honest. Like, I have the experience as well. All they care about is taxes and to avoid lawsuits. And now I see that, if you've noticed that in Toronto, in the areas where the green lands are now being used for developments, people are protesting, and the cities don't care about it. They're actually calling the police on it. So, and now, as you mentioned as well, that now even in 2020, 2021, we are seeing this huge percentage of retail investors coming in, and they're just doing this whole pump and dump thing, where they do not necessarily care about the other stakeholders, like stockholders, and companies do not even have control over it, because they're pumping a stock, dumping the stock. So my question, I think, would be that how should, as a manager, should I go implementing this in my organization? Do I have, and then also, maybe when you say stakeholder, are all stakeholders equal, or do I have to assign weightage or a value to a stakeholder, right? And then post, and maybe a follow-up question would be, and it's probably became a loaded question, is that post-COVID, now in 2021, how do you see the organizations, like, do you see any shift happening? Like, to be honest, like in your, like, since you work with various organizations, do you see any shift happening, and what's the next decade have for us? Like, so maybe some insights of where you see things going in the next decade as well.
I'll answer your second question first. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't. And but I can maybe project some things, but I don't know if they're going to pan out. But coming back to your first question about this Milton Friedman versus Freeman divide, and thinking about shareholder versus stakeholder, short-term versus long-term. So that's exactly the separation fallacy I was talking about. So separation fallacy, we need to reject this. What happens is that, yes, we understand that in organizations, we do care about short-term goals. We do care about, in cities as well, like you said, governments, they do care about short-term goals. So that's a very common thing we hear in Pakistani media, in especially news media, that 3 सालों में 4 सालों में आपने ऐसा काम करके दिखाना, that people start giving you votes, right? So it's a very short-term view. Now, I totally understand that. The point about stakeholder theory is that we need to really go beyond this now, if we want to sustain. Coming back to your own example of your CTO, for example, just caring about some project to get done with, get the money and get some bonus perhaps, what's going to happen out of it? The moment your employee is going to find any better job, they're going to leave you. There's no, they won't volunteer for you. They won't feel motivated to work for you. Your overall company worth is going to go down then, right? So that's how you're going to then lose in the long run. So unless until companies, they realize this, and they have a really high turnover ratio, and we know that it costs them money, it's not a very good, healthy thing. And something like COVID, when this started, a lot of the times companies did not have too much money to pay to their employees. But if they were treating them well during good times, they got good treatment from their employees during bad times. So that's the whole point, right? So really, I mean, this is one of the points that Ed mentioned. So I had the pleasure of actually, or honor of visiting Darden 2019, and I went to spend about 1 week with all the people who write about strategic management and stakeholder theory. And in one of the sessions, we were really talking about these questions, that it's too murky, it's too difficult. And his answer was really amazing. And he says, Umair, then what's the point of working with easy problems? I mean, you have a life, work with something difficult. So, and that's something that one of the quotes, I think from, I don't know, one other scholar that he quoted. So that's how it is. I mean, work for something that's not very easy to solve. Now, I understand as a researcher, I do understand why we are here, how we got here. Because if you open any business school book, and I'm a business graduate, any business school, and I've taught in business schools. So when you open the book, finance book, on the first page, you would find the statement that the fiduciary duty of any organization is to create wealth or value for their shareholders only. So that's how we start our education system, right? So that's why it's so much ingrained in us. But we are changing it. We will change it. This is going to happen now. We have to look beyond just a few stakeholders. And you said another point that I picked from your question was this prioritization. So are all stakeholders equal versus can we prioritize them? Now that's again a very difficult question to answer just like that. Ideally, yes, they should all be equal. In reality, no, they're not that equal. There are some, that's why we call them primary stakeholders or secondary stakeholders. Now, it's not to say that secondary stakeholders are not important. There are cases in the world. I think there was one case out of Brazil. So one of the forests was being cut and one old lady was living there. And there was a blogger who was a travel blogger who was just visiting that area. And that lady was standing against corporations to cut down the trees and all that, you know, the classic case. And the blogger actually started talking about this on YouTube and through different social media channels. And a lot of media picked that problem. And then the corporations had to back down. So look, there was just one person versus big corporations. So legitimacy can be raised just like that. And because of social media, I mean, the pace at which it is happening, it's happening at a much, much faster pace. So a lot of people just get together. Another good observation that you probably also have seen, that this next generation, they demand some ethics. They just cannot keep their eyes like this. They want to have something to be done with all these ills that are in the society. So that's hopeful. I mean, let's just hope that we start treating all the stakeholders the best way and start maximizing their value. So that's a better jargon to say. So start increasing their value, and they would, in reciprocity, would increase your value. So I hope that answers your question, Rafi.
It does. And like what's frustrating me right now is like if you and I think if you go in the market right now, historically the pay of a CEO used to be, you know, if you see the industry standard, used to be 22% of, I was reading some statistics someday that used to be 22% more than an average employee in the past few decades, and now it's actually 700 times more, because all the pressure on the CEO himself is just to maximize profits, and that's what he's doing in the organization. So I hope, like as you mentioned, things change. And the next generation starts taking these things seriously and the business ethics seriously, and we see actually a shift happening in the next decade. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I'll have one question. So I know Dr. Umair, you talked about like when do the organization or when do the startup need to start thinking about all these business sustainability ideas. So can you throw some more light on that? Like at what, like which phase they need to start focusing? Because a lot of startups, I know would say that, hey, we are just starting up, we are just scrappy right now, we're like a 3-member team. We cannot really focus on all these good things at this moment. So where does that milestone come when they need to start focusing?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that starts as early as possible. And I would just say that you don't have to go out and start aligning your interest with all the stakeholders out there from the beginning. And it's not also, I just wrote a paper, it's under review right now, in which I actually talk about this, that having more stakeholders does not merit you to be successful. So again, I'm coming back to my conversations with Ed Freeman about this issue. I asked the same question to him. And the answer that I got was, he's a musician and I also am interested in music. He had an amazing studio at his home. So we were actually playing and talking about music. And he said that Umair, stakeholders are like notes. So when you're composing jazz music, it's not about how many notes you play. It's what notes you play and how well you play them. So that's how I would answer it the same way as Ed would say, that it's all about how well you align your interest with even a few stakeholders that you have.
Okay.
It doesn't tell you that you have to have like 20 stakeholders to begin with. No, I mean, humanly, that's very impossible. So you have to start with, let's say you said 3 people. Well, start with your employees, start with your partners.
Yeah.
Be ethical with them, be fair to them, treat them well, lift the load equally. When somebody's in crisis, help them out. Just be human, right? So that's how you should begin. So it's all about how many, it's not about how many notes, it's about what notes you play. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think, does anyone else have any other questions that they would like to ask? So, I do have another question, which is more of a devil's advocate question, but I'll have somebody else, ask a question before I ask that question, and then that would be the last one. Okay, so I think Ahmed Bhai has some question, so I am going to unmute him so that he can ask the question. All right, Ahmed Bhai. Walaikum Assalam.
Very good information. This was the first time I've heard about this theory about not thinking about just the shareholder, but the stakeholder, which is a very interesting concept and a really excellent concept there. I remember I going to Pakistan and kind of talking about values and people having the right values when you're working for different organization. And often I will receive a feedback that, but Pakistan mein ye nahi ho sakta. That kind of things. And I like the fact that you said start with there will be problems, but start with something that is difficult. And why work on a problem if it is an easy one? So my thought is like, what kind of like advice would you give to the starting companies there who are looking to start their vision and work towards their product? Besides thinking about stakeholders, would you want to give them, think about values and vision and mission too, in the long run? What do you say?
It's actually relative. So I would state, and I do work with a Center for Entrepreneurship and Development in Karachi. It's under IBA. And every year I teach about 1,500, 2,000 students. And they're starting their business. And my advice to them always is that look for what's out there in the communities. What are the gaps? Start with that. Where you can create value for somebody, where you can solve a real problem. So sometimes even as a big organization, if you are just learning about these concepts, you can see that there's this S curve. And what that means is that there's a startup stage and high growth stage. Then you become at this level, which is kind of plateau, and you're going to then start declining afterwards, which happened to BlackBerry, by the way. But they weren't saying that we are declining. I went to them and said, you're at this stage, you have to start another S curve now. So in order to start another S curve, you have to go in uncontested opportunities, like in the communities, for example, or uncontested pastures, and find out what's out there, which can be a solvable problem, which is an opportunity for me, where my purpose is going to keep me in, energetic. For example, in my personal capacity, I do feel about environment and I do care about education. So these two elements are within me. I can't fake it. Whatever opportunity I get to teach, I will teach. My wife wouldn't like that too much, but I would like to teach, right? So find your own passion first, and then your purpose. So passion and purpose, these two things actually help you in your startup stages and make it to the growth stage, and then enjoy in the growth stage. Enjoy the luxuries that you're finding there, and think about creating more and more and more value for all these stakeholders. What's stopping you? Nobody's stopping you there, right? So start with what's out there, start with the purpose, start with your own passion. Ask all these questions. So if you're sick and tired of dealing with different government agencies in Pakistan, and you have to bribe sometimes and do all these bad things which people really complain about. Well, find a way around it. Be smart about it. So one of the really important tenets of stakeholder theory is being creative. If you are still not finding a solution to the problem, the underlying reason is that you're not being creative enough. So think about it, think harder, think more, ask people, you will find a way. And really the people who have made it to that level, I mean, they were the ones who actually thought like that. They did not just think about the problems, they actually tried to solve those problems. So I hope this addresses your concern. Or
yes, thank you very much, Dr. Umair. So this was really good. Yeah, we need to continue to enforce positive thoughts and constructive ideas. So thank you for that.
Sure. And by the way, there's this new book out by Ed Freeman just recently. It's called The Power of And. So he is really against this or, the analogy that we use, this or that. He says this and that. So nobody's stopping you. And it's a very simple concept, but it's mind blowing. I just really love this area of, business practice, that we did not think through too much about these principles growing up. I graduated from a business school. I didn't know about this until I started my master's. In fact, I was finishing my master's when I came across this. So then my PhD was all about this whole new area of business ethics, technology ethics. And by the way, right now, my interest has also gone from business ethics to something more technology ethical oriented. So I'm working currently on topics like algorithmic transparency. I'm working on dark patterns. I'm working with privacy policies, cybersecurity, the humanistic side of things. And I'm collaborating with a lot of computer scientists from Ontario and overseas. We have a few papers out there. So there's a need for these tech organizations, whether it's ethical to listen to you on the phone when you're Facebook, right? So when you're speaking to your friend, the next moment you see an ad. I personally get really pissed. I don't like that. So why are you hearing me, right? So, and you don't tell me that you're hearing me. So as a tech organization, where would you fit in this equation? Not in a good way. So absolutely not in a good way. So as young entrepreneurs or tech organizations who are listening right now, I would encourage you to develop technologies that solve this problem.
Thank you.
All right. Last call for any other questions. Looks like we are good for today, but yeah, I think I just want to thank you, Dr. Umair, once again for, really taking our time. I think we're good on time over here as well. So thanks to all the participants as well, and to all those who asked, some very, productive questions. So I hope it was an engaging session for everyone, and we will be we recorded this session, so we'll be putting it up online as well for, viewing it later. So yeah, thank you very much. And do you have any parting notes that you would like to share, or?
Oh, sure. I just want to thank you for this opportunity. It was a lot of fun. This is good work, and I would like to support you in any way if possible.
Sure.
And if there are any more questions come your way, feel free to send them my way, and I can try and help you answer those questions.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you for your support and taking out time. Like Rafael Bhai said, on a Sunday afternoon. So thank you for that. And with that, we'll sign off, and inshallah, we'll see you in the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.